All right, college football fans, welcome back to the show, First and 10. I'm Josh Rodriguez, your host. Today we're going to go over some of the games, our predictions, see how we did, and then talk about a game that you had to watch, and that was the Kentucky-Georgia game, which we didn't make a pick on, but we thought it was going to be a snoozer based on the way that the Bulldogs had been playing up until then and how the Wildcats had just gotten drummed by the Gamecocks the week before at home. And so this one was almost the upset of the decade. I mean, just about. So I don't know if you guys watched the whole one, but it ended up being 13-12. Georgia pulled it out, won that game. They were able to punch a touchdown in, and Kentucky was stuck with field goals. The biggest takeaway, well, there's a couple of takeaways from this one. One is I was absolutely amazed that Kentucky outrushed Georgia 170-102. So there's that stat right there. But Kentucky had to settle for field goals. So Georgia's defense tough. The biggest most puzzling call from a coach that I had seen, and I'm not Mark Stoops, I'm not coaching, but it just seemed like on that 4th and 7, when he's on the 48-yard line, I think it was, of Georgia, you got 3 minutes to play, you got all 3 timeouts plus the 2-minute break or warning or whatever they call it in college football, but the 2-minute warning we'll say, and he punts it. There. As I'm sitting here watching this, I'm like, what is he doing? Like, what are we doing? So you're punting, you're playing this field position game, you're giving the ball back to Georgia. Georgia had been able to move the ball some in the second half. It was like, yeah, you trust your defense, but then the defense sells out on the run, and Georgia just throws the ball a couple times, gets downfield pretty quick, game over. That was a very puzzling call, and one I'm sure that Mark Stoops probably wishes he had back, but who knows? So some takeaways about Georgia is they finally showed a little bit of vulnerability. That was the offense sputtered a bit. Carson Beck looked pretty pedestrian. I think that there is a template there on how you're going to play them defensively if you want to stay in the game with them. But you got to execute. One thing that Kentucky did really well was they tackled really well. They executed really well, and they stopped the run for the most part. And that was a big part of why they stayed very close. But I would say overall, probably not a cause for concern. If I'm Georgia, probably more like just a wake up call. Like, okay, we've got to bring our A game every time. They won with their B game there against a better team. Might not happen. So they got to be locked in. And, you wonder if they're looking forward. They have a matchup coming up here in the next 2 weeks. I think that's a fairly big one here against Alabama. So anyway, moving on now, we're going to get to the predictions. All right, so we're going to start with the worst pick of the day. Embarrassing. This is like taking a bad stock tip. We were buying Purdue, fool's gold, whatever you want to call it. It was just all bad. It was all bad. So we predicted it was going to be coming down to the last second of that football game, and what happened was an absolute beatdown, a 66-7. I had been hearing that Purdue was going to be good. I'd heard they had guys that, they looked. I mean, they won 49-0. Obviously, the Sycamores are not they're not the Irish, but either way, there was a lot of rumblings that they were going to be a much improved team. And Notre Dame went in there and they could have beat them by 100. It felt like 578 yards to 162 yards. You could just go through it. 362 yards on the ground. They held Purdue to 38 yards. Yards per play, Notre Dame was 8.3 yards per play. Purdue just 3.3. Notre Dame had 2 rushers with 100 yards plus a pick 6. And if you're Marcus Freeman, you got to be happy. This is about as good of a bounce back game as you could have asked for. Purdue, this is why you don't get any national respect. And you know what? I went out there on a limb. I thought you guys were going to be competitive in this game, possibly maybe even get an upset. But man, that was brutal. So our worst pick of the day is right there. So moving on. Yeah, it was like I'm like, oh, this is going to come down to that was bad. So Alabama, Wisconsin. The line was Wisconsin plus 16.5. Our pick was Wisconsin. Now, we missed on this one big time. Not that worried about it. Nobody could have seen Tyler Van Dyke getting injured on the very first drive, and essentially that was that. Braden Locke's effort was good. He came out a little nervous. I thought he settled in and actually, threw a couple decent balls and Some big boy throws, some 15, 18-yard, couple across the middle, dig routes look like, and then, but it was just too little from them offensively. They really don't have an identity offensively, and I think that's going to be an issue that Luke Fickell needs to figure out. The defense ended up being on the field a lot, and the final score, 42-10. There was that 26-yard touchdown run late in the first, and essentially that was it. Now, Jalen Milroe, really good. He threw a really great couple deep balls there, I thought. Looked really good at times. I have questions still about him as a passer, but I think he's doing much better than he was heading into the game. I thought that was a much better performance throwing the football. He can run. He's a true dual-threat quarterback, one of the only true dual-threat, runs like a running back when he's out there. So he's just dangerous, and he's got to be among the Heisman front runners early here in this season. So next up for Bama is a week off, and then they host the Georgia Bulldogs. And so we will that's an early one for Game of the Year candidate. All right, another one we missed on, Kansas State versus Arizona. The line was Kansas State -7.5. Our pick was Arizona money line. That was a loss. So if you looked at the box score, it could have been a little misleading. Kansas State outgained Arizona 391 to 324, and Arizona had more time of possession. You would have thought maybe if you're looking at these things, you'd look at T-Mac has 11 receptions for 138 yards. Fafita threw for 268. But the difference in this game, the reason it wasn't close, was because Kansas State did the two things, and this is pretty much holds true for most games, is the team that can stop the run and the team that can run the ball wins the game. And in this one, they held Kansas State held Arizona to 56 yards rushing. Made them one-dimensional, and that's all they needed to do. On the other side of that, I can see why Will Howard transferred to Ohio State. And this is not a knock on him, by the way, but Avery Johnson is really good, special, I think. Watching him, wow. The way he moves, he's lightning fast, throws the ball, great touch, makes good decisions. I was absolutely impressed with him. Just absolutely impressed with him. So Avery Johnson, he's going to be a Heisman contender, if not this year, definitely next year. We're going to be moving K-State, I think, into the contenders list now. I think they've earned that, and they're going to be a force to be reckoned with in the Big 12. South Carolina versus LSU. The line was LSU -7. Our pick was South Carolina money line. I got to tell you, with the way that game ended, I feel like we won the bet. That call on that block against Nussmeier was incredibly frustrating. Wow. That's just crazy. All of that, and it came down, all of that, this game, this back and forth, 17-0 lead, from South Carolina. LSU battles back. This is a great game, and then to have that call is a brutal way to end if you're South Carolina. You had some other things that went wrong, obviously, so you can't control the refs. You get a bad call. You still have a chance at the end, but just with the way that South Carolina is on offense, it's not going to go their way. If South Carolina has the ball with, 2 minutes left, 3 minutes left, and a chance to drive and win, I'm not putting my money on them to finish that drive. The defense did the job. I thought, they did everything they could to keep them in that game, and it just wasn't enough. They came up short. So South Carolina, they got to figure out their QB situation. I think they're a quarterback really away from being a pretty good football team. LSU has some grit. They showed some resilience coming back from 17-0, winning the rest of the game 36-16. So you got to think, you got to be happy, if you're an LSU fan, and that your team showed some grit and some moxie. I would say Nussmeier is pretty good, minus that pick six throw there. He was pretty good there, and I think he's good enough to take them where they need to go. I'm just not convinced yet that they are a playoff caliber team. And so we will see, but I don't quite see them as a playoff caliber team. Not yet. Missouri, Boston College. The line was BC plus 15.5. Our pick was BC to cover. Slow start for Missouri. They trailed 14-3 before that impressive Luther Burton III. I tell you what, that guy's explosive. He makes kind of a reverse pivot, shakes a guy, gets in for a touchdown, and that kind of changed the momentum of that game. You got to give credit to BC. I think Bill O'Brien's doing a great job there. They have kind of what it takes to compete in the ACC, and they're going to be a tough out. That's what I know about them. The final score was Missouri 27, Boston College 21. Pretty underwhelming for Missouri. If Luther Burden III isn't there, I would have some concerns a little bit. Brady Cook, I think he's a bit inconsistent right now. Like to see him be a little bit more consistent. Runs the ball pretty well. He had that rushing touchdown, which was great, and he can hurt you with his feet. So the defense plays solid, but again, I'm not overly convinced. They didn't do anything to raise their stock. And if anything, I thought they might get jumped a little bit because of what happened behind them with Tennessee looking the way they did and the Oregon Ducks looking the way they did. Speaking of the Oregon Ducks, the next game was Oregon at Oregon State. Oregon was minus 16.5. Our pick was Oregon to cover. Oregon looked the part. They had a very strong overall performance, very, very strong overall performance. PFF grades. Now, this is what's really interesting. In 2022 for Dylan Gabriel, his PFF grade at Oklahoma was 87. In 2023, it was 91.9. The first two games of this year, against Idaho, it was 80.2, and Boise State was 60.8. Those are the worst games he had since he was at USF. Against OSU, this was the get-back game for him. He was a 93.6. That's a ginormous improvement. He diced up the Beavers. The O-line found continuity. They found its groove. And the stats speak to this. Against Idaho, the O-line gave 10 pressures, 3 sacks. Against Boise State, they gave 8 pressures and a sack. Against Oregon State, they had 2 pressures, no sacks. Run blocking, everything looked much better, much improved. The defense struggled in the first half. OSU got loose on they just couldn't get off the field on third down. OSU's quarterback got loose, on several different occasions with his feet, and so that kept drives alive. But the second half, they woke up and they shut the Beavers down, shut them out. A week off for Oregon, then they begin play at UCLA. And if you're Dan Lanning, I think you got to be really happy because you saw a glimpse of the potential and kind of what everybody else was expecting the Ducks to be this year. And so, again, it takes time to gel. You've got those problems on the interior offensive line. It looks good for now, but you're going to have much better defensive fronts than the Beavers, and you're going to play much better defenses than those. So you're going to have to stay right, and you're going to have to get better. But it was definitely, if you're a Duck fan, you got to be happy. Okay, so our pick of the day, UNLV at Kansas. The line was Kansas -7. Our pick was UNLV money line to win. Kansas started fast. They jumped out to a early lead, and UNLV fought back. If you're that's all you kind of need to know about the game right there, right? Gritty win for UNLV. They came back. They pulled out a 23-20 victory. They showed that defensive toughness. And Barry Odom's defensive-minded head coach, and that's kind of what you would expect. The first half, Kansas was having their way with them. I think they gave up 260 yards in the first half and 17 points. And that environment is loud. It is loud. In the second half, though, UNLV settled in. They made plays. They held Kansas to 92 yards and 3 points, and that was just a great response by the defense. They went on a championship drive. Now, this was a very interesting championship drive, but nonetheless a championship drive. It was 10 minutes almost off the clock, 14 plays, 75 yards. There was 2 fourth-down conversions, a recovered fumble, and then they shot themselves in the foot a little bit inside the 5-yard line of Kansas. Would have been first and goal. Ended up being first and 10 at the 16-yard line, but they still overcame that and won the game. So UNLV is a much improved team. They needed that win, that road win. That is a signature win for a UNLV team, and they are definitely going to be in the hunt as the Group of 5 team. There is no doubt in my mind that they will be there at the end of the season. Them and Boise State, who knows who else. UNLV goes on and they play Oregon State on October 19th, and then they host Boise State on 6 days rest. So that playoff bid is definitely not a sure thing, but it's definitely also going to be within reach. Other than that, I got nothing else for you, but we're going to do the prediction show on Thursday. We're going to thank the sponsors, Dr. Mabry of Mabry Facial Institute, He will glow you up. Go see him. We'll put the links down in the bottom. For Sports Idol Nation, I'm Josh Rodriguez. Sports is in our DNA. I hope it's in yours too. Have a good day.